long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a young man from a remote trailer park was saving the Starleague from Zur and the Kodan Armada. And while the 80s were a long time ago, who knows how far away Rylos really is? Sadly, that story didn't capture the cultural imagination and turn it into a juggernaut of licensing deals and start endless wars online over the resulting trilogies of decreasing quality. But they didn't make an RPG about Gunstars. But they did make one about a lesser film. And that RPG became possibly the greatest licensed RPG in history. I'm talking about Star Wars D6 by West End Games. I've already reviewed it earlier in the musings, but nobody talks about all the other source books, and there are many. It's time to start a new series. Welcome to Echo Base. I'm Mr. Welch, and we're starting with the Star Wars Sourcebook. Star Wars D6 is unique with the licensed games because it alone was allowed to write new official lore. They had to run it past LucasArts when they came up with something new, but if it made it into a book, it was official Star Wars. Imagine my glee when I saw Imperial Colossi in one of the prequel movies, considering they hadn't even been hinted at in any visual medium, yet there they were. That's what makes all these source books important. Most of the things that we take for granted in Star Wars lore today was invented by the writers at West End Game. Name another IP holder that will let you rewrite their lore as needed, and they encourage you to do that. The Star Wars 2nd Edition Sourcebook was printed in 1994, updating the game to the better edition that cleaned up quite a few of the mechanical issues. As far as content goes, it's the same as the 1987 First Edition Sourcebook, but with updated mechanics. Bill Slavacek and Curtis Smith are given design credits, and Bill Smith updated the rules to 2nd Edition. The book is 144 pages with a mix of photographs and art prettying up the rules and background. This was one of the biggest books for Star Wars nerds because it gave you backgrounds on many of the original characters, even minor ones with minimal screen time. Mon Mothma got a minute 35 in Return of the Jedi. She gets a full page of background and stats in this source book. Before this book, her only appearance was Guide to the Star Wars Universe, where she gets a single paragraph of history. Here she gets a full page. Granted, the book was also written by Slavacek, so more praise be upon him. Star Wars was over in 1993, but people still wanted more. We'd get it in the Droids and Ewoks cartoon, and then the live-action TV movies that still haunt the dreams of many a Gen Xer today. The eyes. It's always the eyes. Even if you close yours, you can still see theirs. It's like the Star Wars people had a fantastic franchise, and they didn't know how to keep making good products. People wanted to know the backstory on the heroes, the background characters, and the rebel scum. And then West End Games puts out the source book answering the most trivial questions now, and Star Wars fans were unanimous in their response.
Just hook it to my veins!
Back then, we didn't argue over who was a true Star Wars fan, because we always knew. There was the people that sat there for 10 minutes listening to untranslated Wookiee hoping in hell that this thing would somehow get better. But it never did. Both of the source books had identical content, so I don't have to cover one than another. I like the 2nd edition better because the rules are cleaner, but they didn't change a word of dialogue except for the rules that I could find. There's 15 chapters divided between lore, biographies, technical details for ships, droids, and gear. If something or someone didn't get mentioned by name in the movie, or the Han Solo and Lando Calrissian novels, the book gives them a name. I keep harping on how much this book added to the core of Star Wars lore, but that can't be understated. Before the source book, Ithorians were just known as Hammerheads, but then we didn't see them again until Knights of the Old Republic 2. And how's that remake coming, guys? I want to play my trigger-happy, blaster-wielding Jedi again, Gunnius Bunnius. That should not have been a thing. But a Jedi dual-wielding heavy blaster pistols with all the upgrades kills everything across the room faster than a thermal detonator. I felt vindicated that my conceptual character worked out far better than I thought possible. And dirty. But back to the source book. One of the major reasons you needed the source book was it gave you complete rules for vehicles and such that the rulebook left out. This wasn't a big deal in 2nd edition as it included all the main Rebel Starfighters, but 1st edition you started with an X-Wing. That was it. There were no A, B, or Y wings at all. There really wasn't anything outside of a slim choice of human templates, and the rules played to those templates. Who ever heard of a brash pilot flying a Y-wing? So Y-wings aren't in the main book. They get 2nd tier status and show up in the source book instead. If you want to play aliens, you need the source book. The main book used Wookiees as examples in many of the sidebars, but if you want to play as one, you get a single archetype box with no explanation. In the source book, you get a full page. Again, this wasn't an issue in 2nd edition, but I'm talking about why this book is so well regarded. It did its best to explain a lot of the lore of Star Wars. Want to know what .5 past light speed meant? Chapter 1 explains in some detail how much of the spaceship's technobabble is justified. Starting with hyperdrives, the book explains that the multiplier tells you how far it is from one star system to the next in hours. Apply your multiplier to the listed time, and that tells you how long it's going to take you to get somewhere, which is exactly how Texans measure distance. It gives a page on how sublight engines work, then goes on to technical details on the different types of starship weapons. It talks about shields and gives a small amount of lore on particle shields, or why physical things bounce off ships rather than punch through them. 2 full pages on sensors, their variety, their uses, and their limitations follow that. Then life support, ejection systems, and life pods get a mention. And for all that technical discussion, it's all fluff except for one rule regarding particle shields. It's pure geek porn without giving us math. This book is going to be hard to review to people that are already Star Wars fans, because this is common knowledge now. But this was brand new when the ink was still fresh. Rather than just going on, as you know, for everything, I'm going to break down what the chapters give you in terms of content. Both versions of this book are decades old, and the actual lore has been repeated. And the prices have not gone down at all. But I'm going to tell you the impact this book had, chapter by chapter. Chapter 2 is Starfighters. It includes all the ones you saw on the big screen, except for Vader's TIE Fighter, which, despite its legendary status, only appears in a single book. It included the technical details for each ship, which would become a problem in later source books. Why? Because the X-Wing stats, along with just about everybody else's stat block, took up about a quarter page, sometimes more. When West End needed to pad book length, they just would mention an X-Wing and then give you a cut-and-paste stat block that's already been repeated numerous times across several books. If they really needed to kill space, then just reprint the entire page and a half for the X-Wing, including the fluff text. It gave you a 2-page technical layout of the X-Wing that I swear I've seen as a poster back in the day. It's been redone multiple times, but the first instance still makes you warm and fuzzy. You've got all the TIE Fighters from the movies, and that's it for this chapter. Next up, you've got capital ships, and this is a decent selection of the movie entries. The Star Destroyer is there in the Unseen Victory class and the Dreaded Imperial class, though it's the Type 1 Imperial, with the Type 2 appearing in another book. Rebels get the Corellian Corvette and the Nebulon Beef Escort and a Moncal Cruiser. Each of them gets a decent amount of lore, but it's only 5 ships. They didn't break down everything at the Battle of Endor or introduce new ships outside the Victory class. Space transports are next, and unlike the previous chapter, this one leans heavily into West End Games design ships. Because outside the Aluminum Falcon, there weren't many seen in the movie. Now, the Falcon does get the lion's share of the attention here, as well it should. The Rebel Gallifrey gets a call-out, and there are rules for buying transport passage. Throw in space barges, bulk transports, the stock YT-1300, and a sample luxury cruiser, and that rounds out this chapter. The first rules for playing droids appear in this source book, though these are limited and completely blown out the window with the droid source book later. It introduces the different droid classes, starting with astromechs, then protocol, medical, probe, and assassin droids. And no, those aren't the 5 classes, but they leave out industrial droids. So it doesn't cover the full list of droid classes, and it only gives you one example from each category. So no gonk droids. Those come later, don't ask. It's odd they give a custom-created assassin droid instead of IG-88, but I guess it was easier to draw. It's good for lore, but the actual rules don't hit until later. Repulsor lift craft get a section, and they're missing Luke's land speeder for some reason. It gives you the snow speeder, Jabba's barge, his skiffs, cloud cars, speeder bikes, and swoops. These weren't in the movies, but they get heavily featured in the Han Solo novels. And the repulsor craft aren't a major part of the game at first. You need to get future books to go into the detailed sections to use these. When they tell you how they're used, that's when you see them get more play. Next chapter is The Walkers, with the rather famous short story regarding Veers' promotion, featuring a Darth Vader-style upward mobility opportunity. There was also only the AT-AT and the AT-ST, and that's all you get. Plus the really good short story that's obviously there for padding. And they didn't even create a new Walker just to have something different and unexpected. You get the first alien rules here, and while we don't get a lot of new aliens, that would be rectified completely a few releases later. This is where we get our first bit of information on the history of Ewoks, Gamorreans, Ithorians, my first Star Wars toy, Jawas, Moncals, Quarrens, Tusken Raiders, Celestins, Twi'leks, and Wookiees. Not just templates to play them, but the history, culture, and things that made them something interesting. And that's where all the lore originated from, was this book. Creatures get 6 different entries, and a lot of fluff in form of stories. Tauntauns, Minocs, Dewbacks, Space Slugs, Rancors, and Banthas get their introductions here. Not the trash compactor monsters, Wampas, or half the stuff over in Dagobah. But this is more of a who's who of familiar stuff, so it was enough to get us to want more. There's a full-page story about the Rancor, a quarter-page story about the Space Slug, and the section still has about a quarter-page of dead space. They could have filled that out with the, Womp Rat. Unless you realize that was a racial slur for sand people. Makes you rethink how you look at Luke.
I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters.
There's a small section on gear, which seems out of place with the size of it, until you realize First Edition really didn't have any gear except for a small price list in the appendix. That doesn't explain what a lot of this stuff even does. The list of miscellaneous stuff in the book was macro binoculars or personal computers, and it's only 7 items. The source book gives you pages of stuff, descriptions, and examples. It's like they felt sorry for the equipment list at the back of the original book. After that, you got 2 pages on lightsabers that are complete fluff, as all the mechanical rules are already covered. You get a small section on stormtroopers, and it's only the regular, snow, and scout varieties. This will change drastically and quickly in later books, but at least they try to explain the poor armor effectiveness. Blasters aren't supposed to be common outside of rebels and criminals. It's a poor excuse, but the armor does do quite well against melee attacks and slug throwers. Then explain the Ewoks. You've got sample Rebel and Imperial bases, and the biographies that will be repeated constantly appear here. It's all the heroes of Yavin, plus Londo, Mon Mothma, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, and Yoda. Of course, Darth Vader makes the final appearance in the book. That's the Star Wars source book. It's pretty mundane by today's standard, but back in '84, it was a monster release. We finally knew how stuff in the movies worked. Plus, we could play aliens and droids. Then after that, the game only went up in quality. Next up, I'm looking at possibly the most famous of all the Star Wars D6 books, the Imperial Sourcebook. The one that made us understand how the Empire worked and made sense of some really stupid decisions. But until then, forget the guns, ramming speed.